program managers on the remote desktop team that makes Azure Virtual Desktop. Little background about me. I've been at Microsoft a little bit over 20 years at this point. So started in October 2001. And then spent about the last almost 10 years on the remote desktop team. For the majority of that, I was working on some of our clients. So I've owned the Windows client for almost kind of 8 years, and then at some point owned the Mac, iOS, Android, all the clients. And eventually, about a couple years ago, I decided to try something slightly different. And then I moved over to work on, focus a bit more on some of the identity and authentication space for Azure Virtual Desktop. And that's kind of where I've been spending the last, again, almost a couple years, in October and August this year. Some of the things I'm driving is a lot of it is what we'll be talking about today, including our support for Azure Active Directory joined VMs and a lot of other things that build on top of that. And the way I typically think about it is, in a way, I'm helping drive forward our cloud native Azure Virtual Desktop story, if that makes sense. And we'll talk a little bit more about kind of what that means. But that's often kind of how I think about it. So moving on to the I figured we'd start with just a quick look as to kind of, hey, where were we when Azure Virtual Desktop started? I'm assuming the majority, all of you are very familiar with Azure Virtual Desktop, so this should not be news to you. But when we started, and to some extent, a lot of this is still true today, VMs had to be joined to kind of Active Directory or hybrid with AD and Azure AD. We only supported kind of hybrid user identities that were generally sourced in Active Directory, and then also in AD. I mean, ignoring the fact of Azure ADDS and all that stuff, that's also supported. Outside of that, we also, all the identities had to be managed by the tenant admin. In another way is that we still don't support external identities today. Users had to sign in with username and password primarily, or we also, in some cases, kind of supported smart cards and Windows Hello for Business, limited Windows Hello for Business with more kind of certificate trust in general. That aligns more with smart cards. And then at some point along the way, we enabled a first version of single sign-on that required Active Directory Federation services. While it was beneficial to a few of our customers that really needed SSO quickly and were okay with ADFS, it was never meant to be kind of our long-term single sign-on story, and we want to have something a bit better than that. So, and we'll talk a bit more about that in just a moment. So, a lot of the feedback we've been hearing from you and a lot of the other customers we talk to kind of goes hand in hand with this. So just wanting to reduce the deployment complexity and the infrastructure costs. So today with the hybrid and all that, depending on the customers, you either have to go set up an AD in Azure, or you have to set up Azure ADDS, or you have to open up some express route or some site-to-site VPN back to on-prem and all that. So we have a lot of customers that basically struggle to deploy AVD before they even get to AVD. So just getting the right networking in place, the right kind of domain infrastructure in place and all that. So we want to try to address that and continue making things simpler. We also have a lot of our customers, either are newer customers that are starting as cloud-only users, or we also have a lot of enterprises that, even though they've had an Active Directory in the past, over time, more and more of our customers are trying to move into either a cloud first or cloud only type of deployment. None of that should come as news, but we want to do a better job of supporting that than we have in the past. Next part, we're hearing a lot of feedback about external identities, whether it's kind of enterprises that have multiple different Azure AD domain, or they bring in seasonal vendors. There's a lot of scenarios there where external identities make sense, and even more so in the ISV space, where you want to try to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop and bring in users from all of your own kind of customers and stuff. So lots of requests for external identities. The other thing too, aligning with Microsoft's kind of passwordless vision, right? Like moving more and more away from the standard username and password and supporting more like stronger types of credentials. We want to also support this passwordless authentication methods in Azure Virtual Desktop, which today we can't fully do, even though parts of it does support it today. The next part is, again, we want a clear native single sign-on experience, is what we've been hearing a lot from customers. That always comes up as one of the top priorities, so reducing the number of credential prompts. And then the last part in that kind of cloud native story is really being able to easily manage those session host VMs, generally with Microsoft Endpoint Manager and Intune, so that they can be managed at the same pane of glass as all of their on-premises devices. So that's a lot of the key feedback we have here. And again, my talk today is more around kind of the cloud native stuff. Obviously, on the Azure Virtual Desktop team, we're working on a lot of additional features, so we'll be more focusing on that kind of cloud native story. So if I was to sum it up in one really long sentence, in a way, kind of what my day-to-day job is for the next probably couple of years, is basically driving to support secure connections from any client on any OS using any credentials to connect to a cloud-native Azure Virtual Desktop VM with an end-to-end single sign-on experience and access to FSLogix profiles. And the key parts are really these, right? So we want to make sure we support this on any of our clients, whether that's our iOS, macOS, Android device, Windows device, or web client and all that. We want to support, make sure we bring along all of our clients, and also support any types of credentials, at least to the extent that Azure AD does. So being an Azure service, we're very much leveraging Azure AD for authentication. So any types of credentials that is supported by Azure AD and will be supported in the future, we want to ensure that we can support that. And then to connect to, so cloud native, what we mean by that is generally kind of Azure AD joined and Intune managed in all our cases. And then when we talk about an Azure Virtual Desktop VM, we want to make sure we support these functionality with both single session, either personal kind of personal desktop environment, or also with the Windows multi-session, kind of, for example, in pooled environment. And again, applying that to Windows 10 and Windows 11. Over time, we're certainly hoping we see more and more folks transition to Windows 11. But right now, we're still seeing a lot of our customers using Windows 10, and we want to try to the extent that we can continue supporting that for some amount of time until we folks continue migrating forward to Windows 11 to get all the benefits of Windows 11. Again, I've talked about single sign-on, and then we want to make sure FSLogix profiles, the majority of our customers are using FSLogix profiles in some way, shape, or form. So we want to ensure we continue bringing that along with our cloud native story. All right, and with that, we're already on my last slide where we'll be spending the majority of the time. So I know the agenda said an hour. I don't think it's going to take that long, but I'll quickly kind of go through this. And this is kind of our roadmap right now. Some of the key investments we are making in that space towards kind of cloud native. And then after that, I'll open it up for questions. So in the meantime, feel free to drop questions in the chat and we can start covering them as soon as I kind of walk through this. And then we can have a just kind of Q&A and back and forth on some of these topics. So step one of our cloud native story or journey was really to just support Azure AD joined VMs. That one, you should all be familiar with that. We went GA last September. That's been doing great. We're getting kind of some adoption, but certainly not as much as we were hoping based on the feedback, in part because there's a lot of other items on this list that are also very critical and that some customers are waiting for before they really start transitioning more and more into Azure AD joined VMs. So the initial support did bring us cloud-only users in some specific scenarios, and it removed the requirement for Active Directory. Again, as long as you did not need to connect back to some legacy on-premise resources, or if you had, as long as you didn't have legacy applications that still relied on Azure, on Active Directory. But for some customers, this was a good enough solution where they could start deploying ADJ VMs, connect to them with cloud-only users, and that's been working really well for them. The next key feature that we have, again, talking about FS Logics being so important to the majority of our customers, is really to bring FS Logic support when used with Azure AD Join VMs. Because that leverages Kerberos to access the SMB shares on Azure files, that was not natively supported on Azure AD Join VMs. So we've been doing a lot of work with the different parts of Microsoft, whether it's the identity team or the Azure files teams and even Windows itself, to ensure that we can leverage the new service in Azure AD called Azure AD Kerberos, and so that Azure Files supports Azure AD Kerberos configuration and is able to be accessed from Azure Active Directory Join VMs. The first version of that is already in public preview. If you haven't given it a try, I'd certainly recommend that. The documentation is live. I can post the link in a minute in the chat. And today it's supported for hybrid users. So that was the first step that we could take. So you need hybrid users and potentially hybrid groups sourced in Active Directory and then sunk up to Azure AD with Azure AD Connect. The key benefits of that is pretty straightforward. So we now have, or will have soon, FS Logic's profile support on Azure files. We often get questions about Azure NetApp files also. That is something that we have in discussion. We are working with the Azure NetApp files. I don't have a time frame for Azure NetApp files at this point, but we are certainly aware of that ask and discussing with them kind of what time frame or when we could enable that functionality on there. So nothing too much to share there, but it is something that is on our radar. So first we are focusing on Azure files and getting that hopefully to GA in the second half of this year is our goal. Moving forward with Azure AD Join VMs, since they don't support group policies kind of natively, and they normally are configured with Intune, we want to make sure you can use Intune to actually do those configurations. So we were excited to announce in April, so a couple of months ago, that the Intune for device configuration was now generally available, and that's been really well received. We've got a lot of folks already using Intune to deploy device configurations. There are already some things that we know that we want to enhance on top of that. So not only did we enable kind of device configuration, but we also enabled access or using the new kind of security panel in Intune to quickly deploy security-specific configurations to those VMs. However, we don't yet have support for security baselines, which just makes that work a lot easier. Instead of having to cherry pick each of the settings that you want, be able to simply pick a given security baseline will be very beneficial. So it's something we're aware of, something we're working on, and hoping to bring to folks as soon as we can. Another things that we know or we've heard a lot is folks want to be able to also configure FS Logics. So again, FS Logics being so important to a lot of our customers. It's something we're aware of. We're working through a couple issues that we have with it, but we do want to bring FS Logic support as soon as we can, so that folks can start using that, using Intune to deploy those that configuration for FS Logics. So right behind that, we want to also provide full like support for user configuration, so per user access. So that one is another one where there was a bit more complexity because we have a multi-session or multi-user environment where multiple users could be signed in at the same time on a given VM. So we are making some changes in Windows to support that, to support configuring individually user policies across with simultaneous users. So that is something we are hoping to bring into preview at a minimum in this second half of the year, and we'll see potentially also get to generally availability before the end of the year, but certainly expect the preview for that as soon as we can, along continued improvements with device configurations. Moving on to another key ask that we've had since the beginning was really bringing in single sign-on, and also on top of that, passwordless support to increase security there. Again, like I mentioned, we brought in a first version of single sign-on with ADFS as a stopgap for customers that really needed it. But a lot of our customers are moving away from ADFS or just want native kind of support for single sign-on. So we're really excited to be bringing in later this year. So I hope we plan to go into preview again in the second half of this year with a new authentication protocol that we are building that not only connects to Azure AD joined VMs, but will also be supported on hybrid Azure AD joined VMs. And hopefully over time, that is the majority of our customers out there. And it really brings in three exciting and key benefits with this. First, it will be bringing in native Azure AD single sign-on experience. So today, when you try to sign into the session host, you first go through the gateway, which is Azure AD based for the authentication, and then you have to also authenticate to the session host, which today Windows itself doesn't directly take Azure AD kind of authentication. So you have to kind of switch over to more kind of username and password or using certificates to sign into Windows. So we're bringing in some changes to Windows so that it will support a special type of Azure AD token that we'll be able to leverage to sign in the users to Windows, and which will make our entire end-to-end connection sequence for Azure Virtual Desktop Azure AD based. And because of that, we'll be able to bring in a single sign-on experience from the gateway to the session host and into the session. And then the session itself will be set up with the proper kind of Azure AD PRTs, if you know what that means, like the primary refresh token. So you will also get a good single sign-on experience inside the session when accessing Azure AD-based applications or websites. The second part of that is really the passwordless authentication that comes with that. Again, because the entire connection is now Azure AD-based, the way to think about it is any credential types that are supported by Azure AD on a given platform would be supported for Azure Virtual Desktop connections. On Windows, that could be FIDO keys, that could be Windows Hello for Business. You could have also on other platforms like phone sign-in and things like that. So anything Azure AD supports, we'd be able to support, which includes jumping kind of to the third bullet now, third-party IDP support. So if a customer is using a third-party IDP like Ping or Opta that is able to integrate with Azure AD for authentication, it should then be supported with the connection to Azure Virtual Desktop, since we'll be asking for an Azure AD token. And if behind the scene Azure AD knows how to go talk to one of these third-party IDPs and complete the authentication sequence, you should be able to use it with Azure Virtual Desktop. So again, lots of great improvements coming in with this new protocol. We're really excited to bring this over in a public preview in the second half of the year, so certainly stay tuned for that. And again, assuming most of you are familiar with it, but we do have a kind of a blog site for Azure Virtual Desktop where a lot of the key announcements will be going there, or as part of this user group, keep an eye on the what's new that will be provided obviously every month like we saw earlier to get announcements around this. So the next one to complete the passwordless authentication support is the previous authentication protocol is great. It will get you inside the session. However, if you are inside the session and you do access resources where you, for some reason, need a re-authentication. So again, we will be setting it up with a proper kind of PRT and all that stuff so that you, in a lot of cases, you will get a single sign-on experience inside the session. However, if you as an admin or someone has set up some, let's say, conditional access policies or MFA requirements that requires a re-authentication inside the session to access, let's say, secure resources or things like that. As it stands today, you cannot use kind of Windows Hello or FIDO keys. Those haven't been supported for a while. So we are bringing in a new redirection, so the web authentication redirection that will enable passwordless authentication inside the session. So when this comes in preview, again in the second half of this year, if a WebAuthn request is fired up inside the session, it will detect, Windows will detect that it's running in a remote desktop session and send that request instead to the PC that initiated the connection. So as a user, you'll be able to leverage your local either biometrics or security devices to complete that authentication request. So the nice thing with that is it's not like we're sending any biometrics or anything away from your local PC. Everything stays secure on your kind of local machine, TPM and all that. We actually said just bring the request to that PC to be completed, and then the interaction gets completed, and you'll be able to essentially complete that authentication request securely and then proceed forward. So that will complete our end-to-end passwordless authentication story there. The next part is if you've deployed Azure AD Join today, you might have noticed that there are a few tricky things that you have to go do to get it working. One, you have to go and set up some RBAC permissions by setting the virtual machine user login or virtual machine admin login. Sometimes that was complex and confusing for some admins, and a step that's easily missed. Plus, there's a limit of 2,000 kind of RBAC permissions per subscription or tenant. So where large customers might run into a problem there. And the next part, when configuring kind of MFA or conditional access, today it added the Azure Windows VM sign-in app in play. And because of that, that made configuring MFA a little bit confusing and tricky for Azure Virtual Desktop, and led to a lot of errors and issues for customers where users weren't able to connect or things weren't working quite as they were expecting. So to address that, we are working on just a new way to deploy those Azure AD Join VMs. Stay tuned for that, but it will remove some of that complexity of deploying these VMs and just make it more straightforward and easier to deploy. So we're looking forward to some enhancement around there. So a lot of these, as you see, the second half of this year should be exciting. So I'm certainly excited to bring a lot of these functionalities. And then I'll move quickly over to the kind of the last two, which are in progress, but will coming in a bit later. Again, either they're really big features across multiple teams, so they take a bit longer, but that does not mean they're lower priority. Quite the opposite. Everything on this list is very high priority and something we're all actively working on. So to complete the FS Logic support for cloud native, we really need cloud user support or cloud only user support. So users sourced in Azure Active Directory that have no presence in AD. So there's just some additional work we need to do to support that. So we're actively working on that and hoping to bring something in preview in 2023. I don't have exact dates yet, so that's why that's a bit more vague here. But certainly something that will complete kind of support and be able to use with cloud-only users, which will be great. And then once we have that, another key ask, like I mentioned before, is really that external identity. Now that falls normally into, as far as Azure AD is concerned, external identities are both kind of B2C or B2B or B2C are kind of two key ways to support external identities. We are focusing on the B2B aspect of it, if you know the difference. So really kind of just business to business, or bringing in more as a company, kind of bringing in partners and all that, or other users into your own Azure AD tenant, and be able to give them access to resources, right? And then the B2C scenario, where you can go and create a special B2C type tenant that is more kind of support some white labeling and all that, and be able to invite users to that, is something we're certainly aware of, but we'll be looking at after we complete the work for B2B first. For a lot of our customers, we think B2B is what they need and what a good place to start for us, and but certainly appreciate any feedback you might have on B2C. I'm not going to talk about B2C now because that's going to be a bit later, but for B2B, we're really excited to kind of work on this. And obviously, we want to make sure that those external identities will be able to be assigned resources. So you'll be able to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop into a given Azure AD tenant that you kind of control and manage, but then assign resources to users coming in from external entities that you invited as guests. And whether those are existing Azure AD users from a different tenant, but we also plan on supporting the different scenarios that B2B supports. And that could be bringing in users that are using Okta or Ping and all that, so a different type of third-party IDP. Or we also want to support social identities, whether they're MSAs, kind of Google, Facebook. So whatever the B2B system supports, I guess today for Azure AD, our goal is to support those types of identities and bring them into and be able to assign resources to them for Azure Virtual Desktop. And then on top of assigning resources, we obviously want to make sure those users can sign into Windows and can access those resources in that guest tenant. So you can publish resources and give them access to different apps that might be Azure AD based. And then the last part is pretty obvious. Is just we want to make sure that you can not have to maintain and create and manage those identities and really just invite those users as guests, and then that those users can just use their corporate credentials that they're used to instead of having to manage two different sets of credentials. And then with all that, that's kind of the end of really kind of the current roadmap that we're working on. There's other things that will come in behind that, but I thought that would be a good place to start. I will pause here. I'll go back to the slides, but the rest of the time until I turn it over to Jeff a bit later is going to be spent on Q&A. So, right, I'm going to open up the chat also to see, but okay, looks like there wasn't any questions yet. So I'll turn it over. So feel free to come off mute and yeah, go ahead, Arif.
Hey, so you mentioned SSO for the AADJ join computers. Is there anything going on AADDSS? Anything like single sign-on there? Because here's a scenario is like when the user logs in, we have a MFA enabled, we have a conditional access enabled, blah, 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 all those things. So when the user logs in, they have to do like twice, to log in. So is there any way, and we are totally in Azure based, there is no on-premises, those things. So is there anything going on with the cloud-based only corporation people, or it just for hybrid?
Well, so I'd say, so there's a couple things there. So we do plan on supporting the new protocol with single sign-on for Azure AD joined VMs and hybrid Azure AD joined VMs. Now, for Azure AD DS, the problem is that supports only domain joined VMs. So you can't do hybrid joined VMs or you can't do Azure AD joined VMs. So we at this point we don't plan on bringing in a single sign-on kind of experience to if you're using Azure AD DS and join the session hosts to Azure AD DS. Now, one thing that would be worth considering in the future is to see if there's a possibility to move to just straight up Azure AD join VMs that you would put in directly join to Azure AD and just have them access to the users. I don't know if there's a specific reason why you need the Azure AD DS part today, and if those requirements might go away eventually, but that's something I'd kind of have a look at first, and then you would be able to get kind of single sign-on and everything else.
Yeah, because I know there is a security base. When you are totally with cloud, it's easy to do with the AADDS in there. But for me, it's easy for a GPO to implement, those things, not to use the Intune through it. So that's the whole part it is.
Okay, so you're saying you preferred using GPs and all that instead of Intune for group policies, for like CSP policies and all that. Yeah. Then one thing to look at could be to do the kind of hybrid Azure AD join up. So you'd have to deploy an actual Active Directory in Azure, right? And be able to configure that with Azure AD Connect. So you have actual hybrid users, and then you'd be able to do hybrid Azure AD join VMs that you could then leverage to do kind of SSO and still be able to use configuration manager if you prefer that over Intune. So it would be one thing you could look at. Obviously, then you have to manage an Active Directory, so it's a little bit more work than just using Azure AD DS, but you do get some of the other benefits of kind of single sign-on and kind of all that.
Yeah, that's not gonna pass through my security.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I was just curious, is there any Anything you guys looking into that scenario with AADDS in there? So okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no, not as much. Azure ADDS is kind of interesting because while it's more cloud only, in a way, as far as the session host, it's almost a step back because then that session host is only domain join, right? It has no tie to Azure AD, which complicate things. So, I mean, if we get enough requests at some point, we could look at it, but I don't think there's, yeah, we'd have to follow up and see if there's anything that could be done there. I get the new protocol is very much leveraging Azure AD for the single sign-on kind of all the way through. And in the Azure ADDS case, because the machines are domain join only, you won't be able to sign into them with Azure ADs.
I'm going to throw my 2 cents in as an outside observer.
Yep.
I think now I am not as familiar with the ADDS or whatever the acronym is for Azure AD and standard AD, server AD. I'm fine with. I think I've seen a lot of comments from people, not just here, but saying, oh yeah, my security people, they require GPOs, they require for us to enforce these security settings. And with the pandemic and people going off site, and this is clearly mainly server AD, and the desktops have to contact a domain controller once every so often, whatever that is, and then they, when they do join, then they'll finally get some group policy updates and things like that. It's what I'm seeing is that Active Directory, as we have known it for the last 20 years or whatever it's been, is going to go away because of the nature of business and the nature of where employees are working. It's easier and more, maybe not easier, but it is definitely more efficient, to manage through an Intune and Azure Active Directory than going through domains and controllers and having to enforce that way, because you can communicate with devices, as long if they're on the internet, or they're on a network, they can essentially be communicated with, and they don't get locked out simply because they didn't touch a domain controller in 30 days or what have you. And I know that's not exactly the situation, but I just think that method of management of Windows desktops is going away. And again, this is third party, outside observer. What I'm seeing from clients, customers, and what I see from the tea leaves for Microsoft. I think it's just at some point it's going to go away because it's more of a hindrance to remote working and people on the road than it helps.
You are absolutely right on that one. One of the reason my company actually went to totally cloud-based because partially we are remote since this company burned, and the biggest problem with us being in Azure because of limitation like this, if we don't want to use the Intune, okay, we are in like ditch. Something is like, how can we cannot use the uh, AADDSS, to penetrate the GPO or other settings, which is more actually way faster than the Intune is. Intune is still immature with providing all those scenarios. So again, there is lots of limitations with Microsoft, why they're not supporting the cloud-based more rather than hybrid. It does not make any sense.
Yeah, and again, I'm sure David can't really comment too much on that. And, but again, from the outside observer, I think when they put in the Active Directory services in the cloud, I think that was the plan to go that route, right? And unfortunately, as things have progressed and technology has changed, and the internet, whether it's connection speeds, reliability, all that stuff has grown. I think, again, outside observer, I have no inside knowledge whatsoever, but it just, I think Azure Active Directory is future. You know what I mean? I think it's more flexible for what needs to be done. And yes, you're right. The Intunes and stuff like that are immature. It can take time, but I think, there's going to be a tipping point, right? Where managing through group policy and server AD is going to become more cumbersome than Intune and others. In my opinion, the fact that I can manage a device through Intune, essentially wherever it is, while it may be a little slower to get policies, the fact that I have access to it is critical nowadays.
Hey, this is Travis. I've been on a bit of a soapbox recently, warning people about not using Azure ADDS to replace Windows Active Directory. And, it really, that product was meant to support legacy applications where it needs Active Directory support or Windows Active Directory like support, but you want to move it into the cloud. There's a lot of limitations that I think even for small companies who may see it as a good option today, it can be devastating down the road. Things like no hybrid Azure AD join. I mean, if you get into a position or a company gets in a position where they want to support universal print, that doesn't work. There's no trust relationships unless you use if you have a trust forest, that's kind of a different story. But if you get into mergers and acquisition, that could be devastating if you can't set up a trust with another organization. There's no administrator enterprise admin account. So things like certificate services, if you need to deploy Windows certificate services, I think the first step is log in as an enterprise admin. So you don't have that. So there's a lot of limitations. And I think what I've seen is people, they either hear, I want to get out of the business of managing domain controllers, or why do we need Windows AD if we have Azure AD? But it really comes down to those protocols that it supports. If you want to get out of the business of managing domain controllers, get out of the business of supporting Kerberos and NTLM. Make that the first step, and then move towards getting rid of that. Get rid of group policies, move to Intune, that kind of stuff. And I know it's difficult. That's a huge stumbling block. But moving from Windows AD to Azure AD DS, there's a lot of limitations there, and you still have that legacy baggage behind it. And also from a cost standpoint, it's cheaper to deploy domain controllers in Azure than Azure ADDS, small domain controllers, that is. So I've seen a lot of, I've ran into this a couple times now with clients.
Yeah, well said, both of you. Andrew, you've got your hand up.
If it's all right to ask a question, because I'm from the UK. How I found the US AVD is kind of cool, but it's just to mention, in the UK, I do work for CDW on projects on occasion. So I'm working for different consultants on different projects, so at the start, in the middle, at the end, or post cleanup. And lately, I've been finding quite a few with Netrix who've taken over Policy Pack. And also, at the same time, some clients have bits from Netrix, as in, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, because it's like a word, NETWRIX, but they've gone on the acquisition spree a little bit. They've bought Policy Pack and a few other people, But also with Patch My PC have been doing a lot, both US, Australia, UK, and Europe. They've taken staff on like around the world, so they've got more of a local presence. So like what Travis was saying, and Jeff as well, sometimes you've got to firefight what you can and not what you can't. Some of the clients I do work for lately in the last 2 years, it's often like defense. It's reactive when there's a problem because they insist on running out of support legacy infrastructure, and wherever possible, we're trying to decommission it or migrate or lock it down so that the client can continue to function, keep the lights on, and then continue to operate, run that system. But a lot of the time, those people who wrote that old GPO, they've gone, or it's there for a specific reason. It's no longer current. So what I've tried to do is push it to Policy Pack. Go with Policy Pack for as much as you can. With AVD in there, it means a better managed like corporate governance on the security side. But then with Patch My PC, if you need like config manager on-prem, go with someone who you've got the support there, because often those infrastructure people on the exchange or the AD admins, they're not around anymore. You've got to change with the times. So some, yeah, keep on-prem if you need to, but you can be nimble if you don't have the manpower or the resource or the budget. Look at the likes of Netrix or like Policy Pack, and like Jeremy Moskowitz is a legend where I come from on the GPO side, but on the MDM now with like Autopilot, Intune. If you try and do it yourself, you can't keep up on it. So maybe look at being a bit smarter. But with Patch My PC, they've got like I signed up for like an internal like training account that they give you for free, and you can learn how to use like their infrastructure on your own account. So it's more just to share that. But Netrix for Policy Pack on the MDM side, the GPOs, rather than half the GPOs on my current client have been working like for a hospital, healthcare. The policies take like 10 to 20 minutes for a desktop to log in, and they refuse to decommission them. So I just said, look, you need to do some housekeeping. It's not fit for purpose. Your users can't log on. They've got like GPOs in there from like 20 years ago, 15 years ago. They've just kept on. But it's more of a question as well. But what would you recommend where you've got? I often look after clients who are stuck in a legacy mindset. It's very difficult to get them to switch to like a modern desktop so that they can use things like AVD. What would you, if there's 3 things that you could pick up, what would you recommend?
That one, I don't have a strong comment on that one, at least from my side. I mean, a lot of the work we do is obviously we want, and thanks for the feedback on Intune and all that. So certainly, a lot of our stuff is a mix of Intune or a CCM from the Microsoft side, right? Are the kind of the 2 primary ones. So, but if others on the call want to comment on third parties, that's certainly fine. But again, if you continue having feedback on Intune, we'd love to pass that along. We work very closely with the Intune team and see where we can continue improving. Whether it's the speed or kind of some of the things and same thing earlier, kind of a riff and stuff, right? Like, so if things don't are not where you want them to be, make sure you continue sending the feedback either to us or through directly to Intune. Project.
Hey, I am Pratik from Microsoft. I work with David on the same team, and I'd like to kind of comment on this last thought process a little bit with the legacy applications and so forth. But bear in mind, I'm new to Microsoft. I'm still kind of learning a bunch of things. But I came from Citrix, and I've been in this industry for a while. Now, I think you're right with a lot of customers. I mean, from a CDW perspective, have worked with them a lot in the past as well. Going back and supporting some of the legacy application was the rudimentary sort of reason behind using, let's say, still your GPUs, using this way of managing the devices. Things started changing when I saw, even from Citrix's perspective, in the last 3 or 4 years, especially 2 or 3 years, starting pandemic, just before that, even with Azure Virtual Desktop, there's this hockey stick of per se adoption. David kind of touched upon that with some of the Azure AD joined SSO capabilities. And then one of the things to kind of keep in mind is when customers don't realize some of the experience element rather than just the legacy application support. And what I mean by that more specifically is some of the futuristic features, some of the experience that gets optimized specifically with cloud native support, not just with SSO, but the additional conditional access, the additional sort of multi-factor authentication, the additional ability to FIDO in, to support more varieties of IDPs and to support more variety of devices and OSs and so forth. I think gradually, as we move forward, enrich the service, AVD being particular, with Citrix as a partner and so forth. There is the bend towards that experience being more cloud native, like, so that you don't have to worry about some of the things that the DS or the domain services was a pretty good example. There'll always be this knowledge set of customers that they will have with regards to, this is how I always configured with GPOs. Hey, but with XYZ branch offices and with XYZ users, which are never going to be on site because, hey, just the way the facilities are provided now with the companies, the bend is going to continue. And the notion of having a better experience with cloud native support is going to continue on, or either just increase.
Yeah, and I think, and I was actually going to comment on that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think what a lot of it comes down to is it's easier to not change than to change, right? I know how to do group policy. I know how to manage server AD, and a lot of times it's people need to be challenged on their assumptions. Is server AD right now more secure, or is it simply they know how to work with that and how to secure with it, secure it from a security standpoint? Are your security people, have they looked into
100%.
all this other stuff and learned about it? I mean, and especially in business, inertia is a killer. How many times have any of us seen a Windows 2000 server with a mission critical application running on it that they pushed off updating because it was mission critical? Now it's running on Windows 2000 still, and they have to pay Microsoft or other companies millions of dollars in support because they can't move it off anymore. It's going to be an even bigger lift and shift to get it modernized. And that it just is so unfortunate. It happens way too much. It's so, I guess what I'm trying to say, it's easy to not change. It's a lot harder. It's going to get harder and harder as time progresses to move away from a lot of these legacy services. And then you're going to be stuck on them. I know for myself, for the longest time, I thought the ADDSS, whatever the initials are, I just thought that was a straight up, it's just Active Directory in the cloud. And then as I learned about it over the years, it was like, oh yeah, that's really, like you mentioned, the limitations and all of that stuff that comes along with it. I'm guessing, and I'm not trying to insult anybody, but my guess is somebody saw that they thought the same thing. It was server AD, but Microsoft is just managing the domain controllers for me type of thing. And so they moved to it, not understanding the limitations, the scope of why it's there in the first place. And so, we as IT, we need to be challenging these things. And I'm not saying you go in and bang the drum and get fired because you're, being a jerk about it, but really it's way too common of an occurrence that companies wait too long, and it becomes a nightmare from a security standpoint, support standpoint, everything. So yeah, that's my
Yeah.
that's my soapbox.
100%, Jeff. But I think one quick point to add there, from an investments perspective, if you start thinking about it from our angle, when we, I mean, you heard David talk about some of the key investments, whether it is with AD joint VM supports, FS Logics, Intunes, user device, etc. I think it's harder to go back retrospectively. It's not just harder, it's also sometimes less meaningful because we're looking forward with regards to some of the investments and trying to modernize the application support, trying to modernize the experience with SSO, trying to also sort of modernize and invest more specifically in security, which comes along, let's say, with Intune's device and user configuration. I mean, that's a cool part. I think that a lot of time we kind of think about it and miss out on how powerful that actually can be. It's just yet another layer of management, but the layer of management with user or device configuration to multi-session adds another paradigm of security. And then to top it off, there might be one or two things that might not be here on the slide, which sort of amalgamate. We are strengthening more security as a profile for the contextuality with regards to not just the extended support of any identities or any tokens with the new protocol, but more specifically for the end user application to actually have access or kind of keep zero trust paradigm and the device posture being hardened, or the access being hardened from a certain IP address, geolocation, OS type, version type, patch type, agent type, and so forth. So we're starting to kind of amalgamate those levels on top of the existing management paradigm. And that makes it more comprehensive as an investment strategy for us to look forward with some of the cloud natives apart from experience.
Yeah, Travis, you have a quick closing comment, and then we should really turn it over to Jeff for his part. So,
yeah, I actually had a question about FS Logic support. I went through the steps to set it up and got it to work, but that's quite a list of steps to get FS Logic support with Kerberos and Azure AD only VMs.
Yep.
But my question is as I was going through it, I couldn't help but to think, why would it have been easier to reconfigure or change FS Logics to support like blob storage that supports AD instead of getting Kerberos or Azure AD to support Kerberos? And I'm wondering if maybe there was some other options considered, or if there's any insight into that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a quick comment, then I'll turn it over to Jeff. So, and then we can continue in the chat. I'm happy to do that, Travis. Short version, the reason GA is a little bit further out for that one is we're hoping within the next month or two to come out still in preview with an update where the deployment process, instead of being 40 commandlets and kind of all the craziness right now, it'll actually be a checkbox in the Azure portal, and it will do kind of almost all of it for you. So a checkbox first, and then you might have to enter a couple values in another field and click kind of go or something like that, but it will be dramatically simplified shortly as soon as we can release that. And at that point, the support for Azure files with Azure AD Kerberos will go in broad preview, meaning outside of Azure Virtual Desktop, which was the only scenario supported right now. So certainly look forward to your feedback when that goes live, and then we'll keep that in preview for a couple months, 2 to 3 months before going fully generally available. But great feedback. We knew that was a key concern, but we wanted to get it out there first version, but we will absolutely address it before we go GA. And then we can keep chatting in the chat if you want, or you can reach out to me offline. And then Jeff, I'd love to turn it over to you. So.
Yeah. Thank you very much, David. This was good stuff. I'm very excited to see all the new features coming and preview, and good conversation, everyone. So Jeff, over to you.
Happy to join.
All
Thanks,
right.
folks.
Thanks, David. All right. What do I need to do? Just request control or?
should just be able to share.
Getting there. I'm getting there. As soon as it comes up, boom.
I see it.
All right. So as I mentioned, I am almost exactly, actually, that might be exactly a month in at Parallels. And so my guess is that many of you have heard of Parallels, but most of you probably know it from their user virtualization, like for Mac, being able to run Windows on a Mac. That's how I knew a lot of it. Now I've also known some of what happened about the remote application server piece that I am working on. But to be honest, I ran Parallels for years on a Mac before I went back to Windows. And that's, mainly how I knew them. But you can see here we have a number of products. And, like I said, most people know the consumer side. There is now also a desktop for Parallels for Chrome OS. So that's actually pretty darn cool, I think. Chrome OS becoming more popular, and cheap tablets and all the, or cheap laptops, whatever you want to call them. I think it's pretty cool to be able to run those Windows apps on a Chromebook. Parallels Access. This is accessing your desktop from home, accessing your desktop from home, accessing your desktop remotely, desktop being at home. So that's, those are kind of the three consumer products. And then we have the RAS application server, which I am going to be discussing today, and how it integrates and enhances AVD. And then there is the Parallels toolbox for Windows and Mac, which I won't get into, but some pretty cool utilities in there as well. So for those unfamiliar with Parallels, I threw this in. I know it's a marketing slide, and I know, we all hate marketing slides, but this Parallels is a large company. We have a ton of customers across the world, and one of the things that really separates us, that people like, is that when compared to a Citrix or a Horizon, is the simplicity with which it is to easily set up a RAS environment and get it up and running. There aren't 20 different component servers that need to be set up. There's no SQL servers or anything like that need to be configured and made redundant, and DR and all that good stuff. It's follow the wizard prompts for the most part, and you can be up and running in no time. So what do we have to offer with RAS? The basic application desktop delivery, whether this is virtual desktops, whether it's multi-session, whether it is even remote PC, we support that as well. This is all out of the box. Multi-tenant, true multi-tenant support out of the box. So this is mainly, for like an MSP or those types of organizations. But even if you're doing, and there's an acquisition and you need to be able to tie into their tenant, things like that, we have those capabilities. One of the things that I really do like to point out is that we have a very powerful PowerShell and REST API to automate pretty much the whole kit and caboodle, if you really want to. It's there, it's up to date, and sorry, that's kind of a inside joke to myself. Discussion I had with Joe Shank a while back about modules and PowerShell and all that good stuff. So yeah, we have, and you can see here all of our capabilities. We have clients for just about everything, thin clients, Linux, Chromebooks, iOS, Android, the whole 9 yards. Now, the really cool thing is that when you look at everything we can do, we can do single sign-on, we can do multi-factor, we have FSLogix profiles, being able to manage those, and it's all done from within one console. Everything is done within a single console, and it just makes life that much easier. And I'm going to show this in regards to AVD as well. See, there we go. So some of the things we can do for deployment: client auto configuration. Don't need to push down any, group policies or any Intune policies, things like that. We have an email find where it will go out, find, configure, download, install, the whole 9 yards. Like I said, and then we have the auto provisioning and auto scaling. This is not only just for AVD, but it is also for, if you're doing multi-session servers, if you're doing non-persistent VDI, could even be for persistent VDI. But, in the end, we're able to, scale, expand, contract as needed. And from an AVD standpoint, even just a cloud standpoint in general, we're able to cut down on a lot of costs that way, because those are servers or desktops not hanging around, even in a deallocated state. They'll be removed, deleted, so you're not paying on storage that isn't being used, that type of thing. All right. I'm not moving. There we go. So I've talked a lot of, about quite a bit of this already, but basically in regards to AVD, we can simplify the deployment. We can deploy the workspace, the host pools, the published app, help you get the apps published in no time, and also hosts, getting the hosts there ready for them as well. And again, it's all through a single pane of glass. So not only are you managing your AVD environment, you can manage your on-prem. So you have all of this management in one pane of glass for your hybrid model. It's not just AV. We don't support just AVD, and then you got to go into another thing to manage your on-prem environment. It's all within that. And not only can we manage all of this from one console, in regards to AVD itself, as I mentioned, like we have the auto scale and things like that, we can also enhance the user experience when they are accessing an AVD desktop or application. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but adding features on top of AVD, for clients that AVD does not currently support, all that good stuff. So that's essentially the same thing, just the picture here. This is our auto scale tab here when deploying a new host pool. So what you can see here, we enable auto scale, and then it's a matter of you picking and choosing, how many default hosts you want, what's the minimum, what's the maximum, when are new hosts created, when are they removed, based on, what are, the criteria that you put in for load balancing. And it's a pretty powerful thing there, because like I said, you're cutting down on costs because you're not having a bunch of desktops just lying around. So this is what our, kind of a basic infrastructure looks like. Whether you have your Parallels client out here, this could be a desktop, internally, externally, what have you. They will connect to our portal, and within that portal, and I will demonstrate this in a little bit, they will see the AVD resources. They will see the RAS resources. The multi-session could be your on-prem resources, all within the same space. So they don't need to know when they're hitting AVD versus your on-prem. And to them, it's all a seamless experience. So how we communicate with AVD, it's pretty simple. We're using the existing APIs. You know, it's pretty standard stuff. You know, we do work with Microsoft actually quite closely to be able to enhance some of these things for us to be able to go in and do some of the things that we do. But nothing is below board. You know, it's all above board stuff. No fancy schmancy tricks that could be suddenly disappeared. You know, all that good stuff. But you know, we're doing direct communication with the Azure tenant. For example, you know, you have to give it the Azure tenant the ID, the subscription ID. You know, we do require a service principal to be able to manage, you know, from a permission standpoint, what's going on within the Azure tenant. So it's, you know, secure, all that good stuff. So this is what I was talking about here with the user experience. This right here, these two in the red block, these are AVD applications, application and desktop publish. The rest of this is from our internal network, internal on-prem resources. And again, you know, unlike, you know, because we put AVD in there, you know, the naming that, you know, obviously separates it. But, you know, you double click on this, they'll get a desktop. If you double click on this, they'll get a different desktop or applications. It all just is how you want to present these and give permissions. One of the cool things we have is the ability to simply right click on a user session and gather information. We can see their logon durations. We can get client information, what their connection is, the user experience, a lot of good details here. You just, again, this is all straight out of the box, right click, boom, you have this information and can see what is going on for that one session. And I'm going to show that live. I had to record some demos because I didn't want to take a chance on a live demo today. So that gets into the video demo. So what I'm going to show here is I'm just going to go through and what I'm showing here is, you know, here we have a farm, and a farm is basically, you know, the all-encompassing overarching management principle. Then you have different sites. In this case, this is our head office. And what you're seeing here are, so the tenant broker, you know, this is actually a multi-tenant setup. So the tenant broker is what does the communication to the different tenants to pull it all together. You can see our session hosts here. This is our on-prem environment, or could be our on-prem environment. Our providers are what we use to communicate, whether it's to AVD or directly to Azure. It doesn't have to be AVD. You know, and enrollment servers, I talked about the automatic enrollment for users. We have secure gateways, and then of course connection brokers to get users to where they need to be. And we do have capabilities of doing routing users to the nearest resources within your, you know, if you're a worldwide organization, you can come in at a single point. You have your portal, and then based on their locations and some other criteria, you can route them to their nearest resources so that they don't have to go through, you know, possibly the slowest connection that's out there. Skip ahead a little bit here. So here I'm showing the providers. We have 3 different ones here. A couple of them are active. You don't see that one up top quite. So and this is what we're talking about now. If I was to I create my provider first for AVD, and then that kicks off a wizard that will go through and kick off creating the workspace. Your host, you can then create your host pools. Templates are images, basically. And I wish I would have shown, because I don't show the what the properties of a template is, but we are able to apply optimizations. We have a standard set that if you want to use, you can enable or disable each portion. You can add in your own optimizations if you like. These are all the hosts that are in the various pools and whatnot. And here we have for our sessions, I'm going to pick on actually myself here for a second and go down, show information. And this was when I took this video. You can see I had a 14-second login. It was the first time I was logging in, so no new profile, anything like that. You know, my user information, IDs, all this wonderful stuff from in here. Now, I wasn't, I forget what I was doing. I don't know why the user experience is not filled in there. And then, so here, now the other thing, you know, some of the other things we can do and go in, and what I did here was I wanted to see, hey, what processes are running. And then I changed, so this is what I was on. And then from here, I can change it. I can see, you know, all the processes running within that scope, within the within the server, and just take a look at, you know, what everybody is running at that point in time. So we also have, if you want more stats, to be able to enable those. Now because I couldn't remote control myself, I went to different session, different host here. These are, you can see some of the things that we're able to do within here. Now these tools, this is kind of our standard tool set. You can add your own tools within here as well. And I'm pretty excited about what we have coming up with RAS 19. We're at 18 right now, and certain partnerships about adding in tools and whatnot, but it's a pretty cool feature to be able to add and add in what you want, where you want. Yeah, and just showed recreating. You can just force a recreate of a VM if you needed to. So now what does it look like from the user standpoint? I know we're coming up on time. So user logs in. This is kind of the same thing that was in the picture before. You can see I've got Windows 10 Enterprise. These are the AVD. This is the AVD here. And now I'm starting everything from within the browser. You have a client as well. And in fact, for the AVD connections, that does require at this time that it uses the actual client installed on the desktop. So right now it is only supported on Windows, but that is something we are definitely working with Microsoft on fixing. But initially here, it's going to start up Word that I start up, going to start it in the browser. You can see there, I can select where I want it to start. It will auto detect if you have the client and offer to install if it's not, if you don't have it. But you can also just default to the browser and starts up just like you would see standard Word, just all within that browser. And then I'm going to now here you can see when I right click on the AVD, open in Parallels client, it's the only option. So that's what's going to happen. It goes through, I put in my password and stuff, and yes, it's bigger. Then I narrow it down here, and I'm into my AVD desktop now. And, you know, just like any other, the clients and all that good stuff, I can, you know, be running multiple instances, the whole 9 yards. With that, there we go. All right. So to close up, this is the solution brief that we have with Microsoft in that we, you know, how we work with AVD and Azure. I want to make that clear. It's not just AVD. It is also Azure. The big thing being is that, you know, unlike other products that are out there to help manage AVD, not only do we manage AVD, but we also allow you to manage all your environments on-prem and within the cloud as well. So this is a great case study that just came up. if you have any interest in taking a look through this to see what we can do. This is very much AVD focused and hybrid focused with them. And it is a great read to find out, to see exactly how customers are using us within hybrid environments. RAS 19 is coming out very, very quickly. We just went into public preview for RAS 19. These are a lot of different things that we are adding on here. You can see MSIX app attach integration for beyond AVD as well. Let's Encrypt, which is basically certificate management without having to pay a fee, because we've partnered with them, with Let's Encrypt. Multi-MFA, restrictions, all sorts of good stuff here. Some of this is there, a lot of this is also being expanded upon as well. Multiple clouds, just saying. So if you want to try RAS 19 to give it a shot, or even if you want to give 18 a ride right now, you would go to my.parallels.com, and there you can sign up and register for an account to get access. If you go to RAS Beta, that will get you to the RAS 19 beta. It's public preview now, so you can go down, go in, register, and download it to see what's all the features of what's new and better explanations. You just there's a link there, and we are hiring. We are expanding, and I can't tell you how excited I am about where we are going from a RAS and just overall Parallels development. I wish I could get into more on that. My position is as outbound product manager, so you'll be hearing and seeing a lot of me from like this type of scenario, pushing out information and also collecting the information from clients and customers and bringing that to our inbound product managers, our devs. And, so if you've got things that, if you're using us or if you looked at us, hey, let me know, what did you like? What didn't you like? That's the stuff that I really, really want to know, so that we can, if it's something you didn't like, find out why and find out what we can do to potentially fix it or get around it, whatever.
Great. Thank you,
Sorry
Jeff.
about
This
that.
was good stuff.
Yeah, thank you. And this is my first time presenting, as you saw, for presenting for Parallels.